For nearly 25 years, David Feherty was the most beloved voice in American golf. Not the most technically proficient, not the most decorated, the most beloved. Millions tuned in specifically for him, for the way a single sentence could sweep through a stadium like a tide, pulling laughter out of strangers who had nothing else in common. He made the game feel human, which is a harder thing to do than it sounds, and nobody else came close. What those millions did not know, what almost nobody knew, was the arithmetic of his daily survival. 30 to 40 painkillers, 2.5 bottles of whiskey, not after the cameras went dark, while they were rolling every single day. This is not a story about golf. This is a story about what a human being can conceal behind a smile, what it costs to maintain that concealment for decades, and what remains when the hiding finally becomes impossible. David William Feherty was born on the 13th of August, 1958, in Bangor, a quiet coastal town in County Down, Northern Ireland. The kind of place that does not typically produce legends of any variety. By every early indication, he was headed toward a quietly unremarkable life, except for one thing: he wanted to sing opera. Not someday, genuinely. The voice was trained, the desire behind it real. From an early age, Feherty was drawn not merely to music, but to performance, to the electric charge between a person on a stage and the audience receiving them. But somewhere between that ambition and the rest of his life, he discovered he could also strike a golf ball. And it turned out he could do it rather well. At 17, he made a decision that would determine the next 6 decades of his existence. He turned professional. He would revisit that trade-off years later with the dry precision that made him famous. "I was always interested in music from a very early age," he said. "But when I turned pro at 17, I haven't sung a note since. Now I only sing to punish my children." He passed through a series of apprenticeships: Bangor Golf Club, Midart's, back to Hollywood, eventually to Balmoral, where he worked under Fred Daly, the only Irish-born winner of the Open Championship. A rigorous education under a man who had no patience for anything less. What nobody understood at the time, not even Feherty himself, was that the performer had never left. The opera singer had simply found a different stage. In 1980, at 22, Feherty won the Irish PGA Championship at Royal Dublin, becoming the youngest champion in the tournament's history, the kind of result that announces a serious talent rather than a promising one. Over the following decade, he built a respectable career on the European Tour, the Italian Open and the Scottish Open in 1986, both in playoffs, the BMW International Open in 1989. By 1992, he had reached 33rd in the world rankings, 5 European Tour titles, over $3 million in career earnings, a genuine contender. On paper, it looked like a focused, disciplined ascent. The paper was wrong. What was happening beneath the surface tells a completely different story. Feherty was a functioning alcoholic throughout most of his playing career. The word functioning matters, because a functioning alcoholic does not look like what most people picture. They show up, they perform. They shake hands, give interviews, board the next flight, and sometimes, in the middle of all of it, they win. The addiction runs quietly underneath everything else, invisible to the outside world, and often, for a disturbingly long time, invisible even to the person carrying it. Then came 1986. Feherty had just won the Scottish Open, one of the most prestigious titles on the European calendar. What followed the victory was not a celebration in any conventional sense. It was a blackout lasting 2 full days. When he finally surfaced, he found himself lying on a golf course 72 kilometers from the tournament site, beside the manager of Led Zeppelin, a personal friend he had apparently been with at some point during those lost 48 hours. The Scottish Open trophy, one of the oldest sporting trophies in the world, was missing. It has never been found. Feherty would later speculate, with the particular brand of dark comedy only he could make land, that it was likely in the custody of someone connected to the band. It was funny the way he told it. It always was. That was precisely the problem. In 1991, Feherty was selected to represent Europe at the Ryder Cup at Kiowa Island, South Carolina, later nicknamed the War by the Shore, a label that was earned. The United States was 7 months out from the Gulf War. Patriotism was at a fever pitch. Several American players arrived in camouflage hats. The galleries were loud and partisan, in a way golf had rarely seen, operating somewhere at the edge of what sport is supposed to contain. Feherty was 33 years old and a Ryder Cup rookie. On the final Sunday, he was handed one of the week's most pressure-laden assignments, a singles match against Payne Stewart, one of the defining figures in American golf. He led 4 up with 4 holes to play. Then he dropped 2 consecutive holes and suddenly the outcome was no longer certain. Walking toward the 17th tee, a marshal mistaking Feherty for a spectator moved to stop him. Stewart, without pausing, draped an arm over his opponent's shoulder and told her, "Ma'am, I'd love you to hold him right here, but he's playing against me." The tension fractured, just for a moment. Then, they kept playing. Feherty won 2-1. It was Europe's first lead of the day. Europe ultimately lost the overall match by the narrowest possible margin, 14.5 points, to 13.5 after Bernhard Langer missed a short putt on the final green of the final match. Feherty would later name it the greatest moment of his playing career. Not a tournament victory, not a ranking, a team match he was on the losing side of. That single fact says something important about the man. By 1993, the career was no longer the only thing under strain. Feherty's first marriage, to Caroline Mart, a South African woman he had met while competing on the Sunshine Tour, was coming apart. When Caroline decided to relocate to Dallas, Feherty, followed by his own account, partly because of another man, but more truthfully, because he could not bear the idea of an ocean between himself and his 2 young sons, Shay and Rory. To compete in America, he needed a PGA Tour card. He earned one through qualifying school, which is no small achievement. But he never truly adapted to life on the American circuit. The results were modest. The marriage ended in 1995. In between, there was one extraordinary week. At the 1994 Open Championship at Turnberry, Scotland, Feherty played some of the finest golf of his career. After 3 rounds, he trailed the leaders by 2 shots. He shot 70 in the final round. Nick Price shot 66 and won. Feherty finished tied for 4th, the closest he would ever come to a major championship. Years later, he returned to that week with the kind of honesty that makes people in the room go quiet. Looking back now, I don't think I wanted to win. It was not a deflection. It was something more uncomfortable than that. A man looking clearly at himself at the edge of something great and acknowledging, without flinching, that some part of him had not reached for it. He retired from professional competition in 1997. That same year, CBS Sports offered Feherty a position as an on-course reporter. He accepted immediately. His explanation was characteristically simple. "I always enjoyed talking more than playing, and now CBS is paying me for what I like to do most." Nobody at CBS, probably including Feherty himself, fully anticipated what was about to happen to golf commentary. The form at that time was measured, reverential, largely predictable. Feherty arrived and treated it like a late-night comedy set with a backdrop of fairways. He described errant shots with lines the sport's broadcasting history had no precedent for. "That ball is so far left. Lassie couldn't find it even if it was wrapped in bacon." Irreverent without cruelty, sharp without venom, the balance was harder than it appeared, and nobody else in the medium had it. Then came the moment that defined him entirely. Feherty was walking with Tiger Woods during a broadcast when Tiger found himself in a genuinely punishing position, ball buried in thick rough, nestled against the root of a large tree. Feherty assessed the situation and told viewers the only rational option was to chip sideways, accept the damage, and move on. Tiger pulled a 2-iron from the bag and hit a sweeping slice of more than 200 yards that stopped 12 feet from the flag. As he passed, Tiger smiled. "You called that one, didn't you?" Feherty replied, "I don't know what you are, but there weren't 2 of you on Noah's Ark." Those were the first words the 2 men had ever exchanged. The line became legend. America had found its voice of golf, It had absolutely no idea what that voice was carrying. While the country laughed along with David Feherty on CBS, something else entirely was unfolding behind the frame of every broadcast. The drinking had never stopped, neither had the pills. The scale of it was almost incomprehensible. In an interview with Rolling Stone, Feherty described what a typical day actually looked like during those years. A typical day was 30 to 40 Vicodin and 2.5 bottles of whiskey, real whiskey. Whiskey with an E. There was cocaine, there were other substances. When I think about it now, I'm like, why am I alive? It is worth sitting with those numbers. 30 to 40 Vicodin per day is a quantity that causes organ failure in most people. 2.5 bottles of whiskey on top of that is not drinking. It is something closer to a sustained medical emergency. And yet, Feherty was showing up to broadcasts, standing alongside the greatest golfers in the world, delivering lines that made millions of people laugh out loud. In 2011, he was formally diagnosed with bipolar disorder, a condition that had almost certainly been shaping his behavior for decades without anyone, including himself, having a name for it. He described the diagnosis with characteristic directness. I don't suffer from bipolar disorder. I live with it. I see from a different side of the street than most people. The turning point came during a filming trip in Canada. Feherty was working alongside Tom Watson and Jack Nicklaus when Watson quietly placed his hand over the camera lens and looked directly at him. "You're not well, are you?" Watson said. Feherty answered, "No, I'm not." Watson continued, "I can see it in your eyes." Feherty asked, "What do you see?" And Watson said simply, "My reflection." Watson had walked a similar road years earlier. He recognized, without needing it explained, exactly what he was looking at. Feherty got sober in 2005. Years later, he described what that moment had meant. "When I was in the abyss, at the bottom of a well I thought I'd never climb out of, I looked up for help, and the face looking down at me and the hand reaching for me was Tom Watson's." Sobriety held. For 10 years, it held. During that same decade, Feherty built something remarkable. In 2011, he launched a self-titled interview program on the Golf Channel that ran for nearly a decade and close to 150 episodes. The guest list read like a catalog of American cultural life. 4 former presidents, Michael Jordan, Samuel L. Jackson, Jack Nicklaus, and dozens more. The most popular program the network had ever produced. By any measure, Feherty was at the peak of his public career. Then the morning of the 29th of July, 2017, arrived. It was Shay's 29th birthday. Shay was Feherty's firstborn, his eldest son from his first marriage. The phone rang early at the Feherty home in Dallas. His wife Anita answered, then walked quietly into the bedroom where David was still sleeping. She handed him the phone and said softly, "You need to take this call." It was Rory, his younger son. Shay had died that morning of an overdose at his mother's home. The coroner confirmed a combination of cocaine and alcohol had killed him. Feherty later said of his son, "He was lost in so many ways, reminded me a lot of me, which is just one of the reasons I can't help but feel devastated and guilty about what happened to him." The grief broke something open. Alone at a friend's ranch in the days that followed, Feherty reached for a bottle of Irish whiskey for the first time in a decade. "I thought, I've been sober 10 years. I want to feel better," he said in an HBO interview. "Before I knew it, it had me under control. 10 years gone in a single night." 3 former presidents, Bush, Obama, and Clinton, reached out personally. Watson spent hours with him, both by phone and in person. Watson later said simply, "I just let him talk." Feherty did not disappear. He came back and spoke openly about the relapse, about Shay, about bipolar disorder, in interviews, on stage, in print. Where another public figure might have retreated into silence, Feherty turned his darkest material into something useful. He became one of the most prominent mental health advocates in American sports, telling audiences plainly, far too many people are owned by addiction and devastated by depression. There's such a stigma attached to mental illness that they're afraid to get help. He had founded the Troops First Foundation years earlier, supporting wounded military veterans and received the Outstanding Civilian Service Award in 2012. 4 of his books reached the New York Times bestseller list. He toured a one-man live show 2 uninterrupted hours that left audiences laughing and crying, often at the same time. In 2022, after 25 years in golf broadcasting, he departed CBS and joined LIV Golf as lead analyst. Controversial, but characteristically Feherty. He has never been interested in the expected thing. Here is what actually happened to David Feherty. A boy from a small town in Northern Ireland wanted to sing opera. He picked up a golf club instead, turned professional at 17, and spent the next 2 decades winning tournaments while quietly falling apart inside. He lost a trophy that has never been recovered. He nearly lost his life to substances that would have killed most people outright. He lost his marriage, and in 2017, he lost his son. Through all of it, every broadcast, every one-liner, every moment that made a nation laugh, he was carrying something the audience never saw. That is the particular power and particular danger of humor used as armor. It works. It works so well that even the people closest to you can mistake the performance for the whole person. Feherty understood this better than anyone. "The only thing that kept me alive was my sense of humor," he said once. "I really believe that's a human's last line of defense. If I can't make them laugh, I want to make them smile." He was not joking.